Welcome to Module 2, the Self and Attitudes. Note that we're skipping Chapter 3, so this module covers Chapter 4 and 5 of the textbook. How do we know ourselves? This might sound like a simple question. We're with ourselves all the time. But how accurate are we really, and how well do we know ourselves? How do we develop our self-concept, that knowledge about our personality, skills, abilities, physical characteristics, roles, and values? For us, certain areas tend to be salient. So using the I am method, physical appearance often tends to be salient. I am tall. I'm attractive. Personality is often salient as well. I'm shy or I'm funny. We often include characteristics that make us different or unique or are important to us. Someone who's blind, for example, is more likely to have I'm blind as part of their self concept than someone who is sighted is likely to have I can see in their self concept. Some of us have many I ams, which means we're high in self complexity. Now, if a person only has a few, say being an athlete is a very strong part of their self concept and it's the dominant part of their identity, think about what happens if they're injured and can no longer participate in sports. They'll be more likely to be devastated because they don't have other important parts of themselves to fall back on. So we see that self complexity is important to mental health. What happens when we're confronted with the fact that we acted in a way that's contrary to our self concept? I might think of myself as a person who's kind and helpful, but I didn't give money to a charity when I was recently asked, and I didn't help a friend who needed a ride. This can be uncomfortable, and we seek to reduce the cognitive dissonance it produces. If I'm a kind and helpful person, why didn't I help that friend, or why didn't I give money to that charity? To make ourselves feel better, to reduce that dissonance, we might remind ourselves of the other times we helped other people. Or we might decide that person really didn't need or deserve the help. We want to feel good about ourselves, and this relates to self-esteem, which is our belief that we're good people. This is good, right? We want people to feel good about themselves. We don't want people to think they're bad or unworthy. But we also don't want people to be narcissistic and think that they're better than others. As you'll see in Chapter 4 and in the reading by Jean Twenge, high self-esteem isn't always good. How do we know we're good or bad, worthy of good things or unworthy? We compare ourselves to others. How do I know if I'm smart unless I have a comparison? We also try to make ourselves seem good and worthy to others by presenting ourselves in ways that we think make us look good. And it isn't just us as individuals, we also belong to groups. Those group identities, known as social identities, are part of our self-concept too. For example, you're a student at National Louis University. That group identity is part of who you are, and you may want your group to be seen as good and worthy. The better it is seen, the more you feel positively about yourself. Our attitudes also reflect who we are. For example, you might be someone who hates to exercise or someone who loves to exercise. Or you may believe in climate change, or you may not. Attitudes consist of three elements: affect, which are positive or negative emotions, behavior, and cognitions or thoughts. This is what's generally known as the ABC model. Our attitudes are mostly learned, and some are more strongly held than others. For example, you might hate to jog, but another person just dislikes it somewhat. As you may notice, we don't always act on our attitudes. That behavior is often the weak link here. You may dislike a coworker, for example, but you're pleasant to him. Chapter 5 examines when we might be more likely to act on our attitudes. How do we change our attitudes or change others to agree with us? How do you convince people that they should vote for your favorite candidate? Or how do you get convinced that the other candidate is better? Persuasion is everywhere. Just think of all the ads you see every day trying to convince you to buy a product. There are a variety of techniques, and which persuasion technique you use may depend on the circumstances. Our attitudes don't always match our behavior, and this can lead to attitude change. Let's say one day at work, a potential new hire comes in and is waiting to be interviewed. They ask you how you like working here, and you say, I'm happy here. It's a really great place to work. Now, you've been thinking about looking for another job, so why did you say that? Well, maybe you do like it here. We want our attitudes and behaviors to match, and so when they don't, we may experience cognitive dissonance. You did the behavior, you said what you did, so thinking it isn't a great place to work contradicts with what you just said. You can't change the behavior, but you can change the attitude that aligns with it. Or maybe you do dislike the job, but your boss threatened to fire you if you said anything negative to potential candidates, and you need the job. You still have a discrepancy. You said that you like the job, but you really don't. This time, though, you have sufficient justification for not telling the truth. You need to keep your job. So there's no dissonance here, even though the behavior and attitude are discrepant. You have sufficient reason for not telling the truth. The social psychological theory of cognitive dissonance is incredibly useful and explains a variety of attitudes and behavior, which is why you may see it mentioned in media and writings. It's just another example of the usefulness of social psychology.